my parents, I had expressed interest in playing guitar. They thought that meant classical guitar. No, I saw my guitar. I saw my uncle with like a neon, gem, like neon colors playing rock music. I was like, that's what I want to do, right? But they was like, oh, here's an acoustic guitar. So
were you kind of like high school friends or something like this? And
yeah, it's interesting. Me and Björn went to school together, like multimedia program, I don't know if it really amounted to anything, but looking through the progression of Soilwork, where we started up until we got to Natural Born Chaos, I think when we released A Predator's Portrait, that was kind of like an experiment, because we were like, well, we did Shadow Child for Chain Art Machine as a bonus track. We were like, oh, okay, cool. This might be something. So I called Dirk, and he was just like, yeah, of course I want to go to Japan and Australia. He's never been, right? So he's top 5 drummers in the world. I mean, I would say that, like I said, I think he does a fantastic job in Megadeth, but he's so, there's nothing that Dirk can't play. And trust me, I've tried. Like, it's on the ocean. Like, you walk into the house, and then the guy has literally dug out, it's in a mountain. So underneath, basically everything is like, it's like a round cylinder-shaped room for the drums. So we did the drums there.
It's been like it's 20 years ago since I did that interview with you at Nosturi. I think it was 2004 or something like this. And I believe it was the first tour, if not the first show, with Dirk Verboren in Soilwork.
That was man, time flies. Yeah, that was a while ago.
Do you have any memories from that show or that tour?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. We've played Finland a lot of times. Or I have, I guess. Well, and that one, I think we went through kind of there was a little bit of a tumultuous time in Soilwork's history when, we had, drummers, as that's kind of the foundation for a band, like you have, without a good drummer, it just doesn't, the band just doesn't sound the same, and I think we went through a couple of different drummers after Henry left, and, that must have been like right before. We had not released Stab in the Drama at that point. This was before. Stab in the Drama.
Was because it was. I think it was figure number 5 times. Yeah,
that's right. And Dirk was. I knew Dirk from. He used to write for a metal magazine in Belgium. So he and I, we've done interviews before, and I knew his band, and so it was one of those things. Like, I didn't really when the drummer after Henry didn't work out, I kind of have to like rack my brain about like who was gonna, who would we call, right, to see who could fill in, because we had touring obligations at that time, and interestingly enough, a good friend of ours, Peter from Darkane. I don't know if you're probably familiar with Darkane.
Yeah, I know. Yes.
He already had prior commitments, but he lived in the same city as we did, so that would have been perfect, right? But he wasn't able to do it, and I was like, man, maybe I should reach out to Dirk. And we had, I think we had Australia and Japan lined up, and no drummer. So we were like, oh man, how are we gonna do this? And I remember, so I called Dirk, and he was just like, yeah, of course I want to go to Japan and Australia. He's never been, right? So he flew to Sweden. He just nailed everything. Like, it was amazing. I mean, he's top 5 drummers in the world. I mean, I would say that, like I said, I think he does a fantastic job in Megadeth, but he's so, there's nothing that Dirk can't play. And trust me, I've tried. Like,
exactly.
He can play anything, and he's the nicest guy in the world. So that tour was really, really good, because it was nice to have a tour with no drama, just good vibes. And Dirk is such a wonderful human being that it was just such a joy to play there. I mean, I remember it was a great show. We had an awesome time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's not easy like stuff you guys played. Even like especially I guess in the earlier days, it was even more like or at least before then Dirk came into the picture. It was even more like technically fast stuff. So it was not an easy task to find a suitable drummer who is able to pull that stuff out.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I guess back we were just when we started out, it was more thrash with like melodic stuff, and like that was Björn was all into thrash metal, and I gravitated a little bit more towards American death metal at that point, but we kind of had a blend, that's in the beginning, and then everything kind of changed a little bit.
Exactly. His name was Henry Ranta, right? Your first drummer.
Yes. Well, Henry was, interestingly enough, Henry was the second drummer. We had a different drummer on the first record, but he wasn't, when we were so young when we started Soilwork, I think I was 19, 18, maybe, something like that. And, at that time we didn't know a thing about like touring or what. I mean, we just played music because we loved it, right? And that's why everybody should do it. So after we did the record, we did one short trip tour, like where we did like 5 or 6 dates, and that drummer was like, I'm not cut out for this. Like, I want to shower, and I want to do this. And I was like, okay, whatever. So we had to find and then Henry, he came in. He lived in Stockholm at the time. And so he moved down to Helsingborg, close to where we were. And then he joined in 99, I think. 99, yeah.
Okay.
And stayed with us for a while there.
Right. And were you basically then, the rest of the guys, you and Björn and other guys, were you kind of like high school friends or something like this?
Yeah. It's interesting. We were... me and Björn went to school together, like multimedia program, I don't know if it really amounted to anything, but still that's where we met. And he was, at the time, he was more of a guitar and a bass player. He wasn't really a singer at that point, right? But we needed a singer, and we already had guitar players and bass players, so that's kind of how that all got started. So
exactly,
Björn was very involved with, and probably still is, like me and him would write majority of the music, but he would also come with guitar ideas, or he would come with like, when we first started, right, he would come with an idea, give it to me, and then I would probably just improve it, you know what I'm saying? But it would still be an idea that Björn first came with,
Yes.
And, we didn't really have any singing in the beginning. That's kind of something we started experimenting with on the second album for a bonus track, and, but that was, and then when Predator's Portrait came out, that was when we basically took the step to say, well, we want to incorporate, clean singing, in this music, and so that's kind of when that all started,
Yeah, pretty like an amazing talent pool you happen to have there, like you and then Björn, and then also finding the Henry Ranta, who at least to me, has been like I've been really digging his playing all the time, always, and I think a lot of my drumming has been also influenced by the way he plays drums.
Yeah, I mean, Henry is. It's interesting. We kind of fell off. I've actually talked to him recently, and Henry is just one of those guys. Like his ideas as a drummer, like I haven't heard anybody else. Like he's. I wouldn't say that Dirk is like the best drummer in the world, but he is one of the most musical drummers. Like when he listens to music and he plays drums, he plays musically, if that makes sense, right? Like you can have a drummer who's like really, he just plays the meat and potatoes, perfect fills, tempos is perfect. But then Henry his cymbal work was one of those things that really, I think that part with Henry was just like, I'd never heard anyone who play like that, like the accent notes and stuff like that. So he's one of my favorite drummers. I mean, and he's, even though it's been a long time since we played together.
Exactly. Was it so that, did he play then later in the Defaced band?
Yes, he did. Yeah, that's right. You know your history, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done my studies, yeah. Also, I like that band, and also he's playing there really good stuff.
Yeah.
As always.
Yeah, he's a great drummer, for sure.
Is he still at the moment these days playing in some bands, or?
I don't think he's playing in a band at the moment.
Okay.
Henry kind of likes his solitude, he's but I think he's got a drum set, and he does he's more into production now, I think. So he does He helps other artists out and stuff like that, but he's not really a guy who's out there promoting or doing a bunch of stuff, but he is definitely, he's still playing drums, He's probably more, he always kind of struggled with, I think, trying to find his identity. Like he didn't really know what kind of drummer he wanted to be, but I guess that's kind of like, you're always kind of on a quest to like get better at something or, improve certain things. And I think Henry operates best when he gets to play all types of music, right? Like metal or like whatever it might be, like some prog stuff or, he's, And then he plays guitars too. So I think he does his own music, which he doesn't release. And I'm like, dude, you should release some of this stuff. It's really good, He's kind of like the Phil Collins of metal, I guess.
Right. Nice. Yeah. Ben, as I said, like really been digging his stuff, and if you ask me, he has really found his style, and like at least I really enjoyed always when he was been playing like somehow really, also to me like musical, and he always brings something like memorable stuff to the music on top of that. Just as you said, kind of like just playing instead of just playing the meat and potatoes stuff and just replicating the riff. Somehow he is able to somehow do arrangements so that it kind of really helps the songs. Been really digging that stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. It's a very musical drummer.
Exactly. So, how long have you been now in States, like in the United States, and basically, why did you move to the United States? And is it still at the same? Are you still at the same place when you moved first time there, or what's the situation?
So, ironically, I was in the process of moving to the States when we met. I think it was 2004. So I have been here since December 2004. So it's been it's been almost half my life here. I mean, I'm a little bit older than that, but still, I moved over here when I married my wife. So that was the reason that brought me to the United States. She's from here. She was going to move to Sweden, but I was touring all the time, and she likes, milder climates, let's just put it that way. And I said, well, if I'm going to be gone most of the year, might not be great for you to just sit in an apartment in, rainy, dark Sweden, during the winter time.
Right.
So I decided to move to the States, and no, I don't regret it. And I've been here. We've been all over the place. We started out on the East Coast. And then there was like the whole immigration process that takes a while too, right? So, for anybody who's toured in the States, they know how hard it is to get like a visa to even come tour here, and then, so trying to get a green card, even if you're married, it's still a process, right? And, we lived on the East Coast until my green card I was still touring. But once I got the green card, we left for California. We were only in California for about a year. And then we moved to Tennessee, to Nashville. That was probably my favorite place. It's a fun town, really good musicians, all kinds of musicians. Like everyone associates, Nashville with just country, but there's so many. I think when I lived there, I think they had 1,500 guitar players in Nashville, and it's a small town, And at that point, it was just it's good vibes. We moved, and then basically I was doing production full time at that point, working out of studios there. And then the whole housing crash came in like 2008, which is when I decided to rejoin Soilwork at that point. It was such a weird timing because basically what happened was when we announced that I was going to come back to Soilwork, my wife comes in and basically like shows me, it's like, hey, I'm pregnant. So it was like, we wanted to have a kid, don't get me wrong, right? But it was just one of those things like, oh, it's not going to happen, and the timing was just kind of unfortunate in that sense because I never really wanted to be the dad who's like on tour all the time. So we, as I came back. We toured, we did, Panic Broadcast after that. And, I stayed with the band for like 3.5 years again. And then I was just like, well, I kind of want to be a dad. Like I can't be gone. I want to be there, when my son grows up. So that was the whole reason. I mean, I still love the guys and the music, but it was just it wasn't feasible for me to do that.
Right. And was it so that when you kind of did make the return to Soilwork and you had kind of like a lot of these production things going on, was it that you had some kind of plan that when you are touring, you would do some like production work, like mixing and stuff from the bus or something like this?
Yeah, I mean that was the plan, because one of the things I didn't like about touring is I have a lot of energy as a person, so when there's nothing to do, I tend to get a little destructive, and by staying busy, I mean, like I said, you could walk the city wherever you go and you tour, right? But a lot of people think that touring is very glamorous, and it's not glamorous. Like I try to tell people that when you're touring, there's 1 hour of showtime, and then there's 23 hours of waiting. And then I was like, oh, really? I was like, yes, that's kind of really how it is, right? So you need to stay busy. And I was kind of inspired by, at that point, I think Adam from Killswitch, because Adam, a good friend of mine, and he was bringing his Pro Tools rig on tour, and like he's like, I just mix in the back, and I was like, oh, that's cool. So you can kind of stay busy. He's like, oh yeah, totally. So yeah, that was I did that for probably during the entire time when I was back with Soilwork. I was doing production, in whatever capacity I could, right? Like, I mean that was sort of my, it was kind of like a 24/7. That kept me occupied instead of just sitting there and doing nothing, right, during touring.
But you were able to still, like, as you were saying, like you were doing that, you were able to like do it and like get kind of results and be able to be still productive, because of course it's not an optimal environment even like to do that kind of stuff, but you were able to still do it and make it work. Yeah,
and again, it's we were fortunate enough to tour in a bus. I think if you were touring in a van, that wouldn't be possible. But everyone in the band had their own way of doing things. Some people just read books, and some people did nothing, just played video games. And I mean, it's fine, to kind of make your time kind of go by. But for me, it was like, I love being creative. I think for me, I've personally enjoyed the creative process more than playing live. It's not that I don't like playing live, but, being who I am, I always felt like the creative aspect of it is a different, it's kind of like playing Texas Hold'em, right? There's two different games. Like you start out, everyone's playing, you're playing against the other players, and that's a certain kind of strategy. And then when there's just two people left, and the game completely changes. Like it's a completely different mindset. And for me, music is sort of the same thing, where performance is one thing, and then creative and recording is another, right? There are two separate things that kind of commingle in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess like playing live shows is more like a lifestyle kind of thing. It's kind of like a culture-ish kind of experience. When, of course, like when you're creating music, it's more like it has its own different like a focus and a creative world where it's confined more to that exact thing.
Yeah, and I think the similarity, which I really like, is that you're trying to evoke a sort of emotion with somebody else, right? Like when you write something, of course you want to write it for yourself first and foremost. That's important. But I think being able to perform, I mean, you would have that in your mind too. Like, if you're writing a song that that you're never going to perform live, you're going to probably have a different approach than whether you're writing something thinking like, oh, okay, how is this going to translate to a live setting, right? I mean, we've all been there, right? And, so you take that into account, let's, this is going to, people are probably going to enjoy, I mean, you can get the crowd going. So, but it's fun, it's like, I guess it's very similar to someone who paints or whatever. You're trying to get the reaction of a different person somehow with what you're saying. And for me, music is one of those things, like I call it the universal language. You don't have to speak the same language. You don't even have to understand what a person's saying, in order to like evoke a certain type of emotion in that person when they're listening to the music, right? Whether it's a good or a bad one, you're still somehow getting a reaction for it, which I think that's the beauty of your creation.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. Yeah, and it's wild that different kinds of worlds and different like countries, you would think that there's lots of, and there is different kind of cultures, and it seems like people are so different, but then when you're talking for example about great metal music, it can just unite across all the countries, and that's really beautiful thing, and it means really that we are still kind of the same everywhere despite all these differences.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like right now we need that more than ever. It's just I think music and humor, those are the two things. Like I said, those two things can bring two people together that might not have anything else in common, right? Like, and like I said, I have met, like I said, you tour all over the world, and then you meet people who basically come and tell you, like, oh man, I love this and I love this, and and in a way you're like, wow, this is incredible. Like I am not. I think for me, that's like the best feeling in the world, to feel like someone basically comes up and says like, well, your music has, moved me in a way, or this helped me through this and that. I was like, wow, I never really expected that, but when you hear that from somebody, that's the best compliment you can ever get.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And when you saw that these days, and I guess for a while already, you've been doing quite a bit of like commercial music work for TV channels, ESPNs, and stuff like this.
Yeah, so that's been. I had there was a metal band they're not around anymore, from Canada, that came down to work with me, and one of the guys in that band, basically, at the time, he was up in Toronto, and basically he did a lot of hip hop, and and then he had. He worked with a person that was in the sync world, basically, and he just asked me, it's like, hey man, are you interested in something like this? And I always want to learn. I always want to get better at whatever I'm not good at, right? Because I feel like if I'm not learning, then I'm kind of getting bored, right? So we worked for a couple of years together, and we managed to get a couple placements. And my goal was, because I'm a huge UFC fan, was just like, man, if we can get a placement with UFC, that would be like, for me, like that's like the ultimate, right? And we did manage to get that, but it's fun. I mean, at that point I was co-writing and then mixing, doing stuff like that. But that's completely different than anything else that I've done before. You write when you do that, you write with the intention of like visually seeing that it would work for something on screen, right?
Yes.
So it's a different process, and it's very. It's very restrictive in a way, right? It's not bad. It's just very restrictive. It's like, because you have to you have to hit certain words, and there have to be certain sections in the song that comes in at a certain point. It's like, 28 seconds, you have to have this, and then, so it's, maybe you could relate, like if you're doing editing work in video, that certain things have to sync at a certain time. So that's kind of the approach. I never stopped writing other stuff, and my riff library is quite large. It's just that I've, and there's no lack of people asking me for it either. So I'm just like, I'm just trying to find time to do it, right? So over the years, I've just posted a little teaser here and there, and it's like, but there's a lot of stuff in that riff library that, I'm hoping to be able to sit down and kind of go through at some point.
Right. You mentioned the word sync. Is it kind of like the industry, if we are talking about like, because I'm interested also in this, that like if you have an idea for like or ideas to like for example, for a sports song or something like this, how do you kind of proceed? How do you get in contact with in order to get like, hired for these kind of like, for example, shows or TV channels or bigger league teams? Who are those people, and what's kind of like the industry called? Is it some sync industry or something like this called?
It's it could be a little bit complicated when you first start out, but basically there's a different process, because, the process that I was used to, basically you have a record label who pays for everything, right? So the record label owns the master, and, we were fortunate enough in Soilwork to actually own our own, compositions. The publisher, the music publishing is really, that's what it's all about. So in sync music, technically what you want to do is you want to own the production, you want to own all the rights for it, and then you're going to act sort of like your own music publisher. So when you reach out to a different publisher, and everything goes through a publishing company. Like there's hundreds of them, probably thousands, and you just have to be a little creative when you find out. Let's say that you listen to a song, you hear a song on TV, it's like, man, that's a really cool song. Like you could always get your phone up, it's like, what is this, right? And then you can find out. So you have to do a little bit of digging. But it's a big part of the sync world is, knowing the application of the song. What does the song sort of have to sound like, and then you want to engage a different music publisher who basically places that song with the TV network. So there's like it's kind of like a three-part thing. You don't reach out directly. Very rarely, let's take Fox Sports, for example, or, something equivalent, in Finland. Very rarely do they work directly with the artist or the composer. They normally go to a publishing company and ask them, like, hey, I have this show. It's going to be a 30-second clip, I need something that's kind of like, I want something upbeat, some heavy guitars, and then I want to, blah, blah. It's like, do you have anything like that? And then what the publisher will do is they will go out to all their artists and ask, like, hey, do you have anything like this? And if you don't, you have 24 hours to make something. So normally it's like super quick, right? But it's interesting because I'm not the only one doing this stuff in the metal scene. There's other guys who actually do sync music on the side, like from like what they normally do. So some people just focus 100% of their time just doing this over and over again. But some people just do it on the side. It could be trailers, like I have a good friend who is into, very successful in trailer music. And, but that's all with orchestration and stuff like that. So it all depends, like it could be anything from like Activision to a Disney thing, or even just like a sports show. So you kind of have to be a chameleon a little bit when it comes to composition, right? And you have to be fast. Like, yeah. So, but anyway, I don't know if I answered your question there. It's just, you have to do a little bit of research, but it's basically you owning your own music, everything. And then using that to license to different publishers for a certain period of time, like a term. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess the role or the approach you are explaining is kind of like that, like there's this sync publishing company or something like this, and then you would be an artist with them. But what about, is there a route, for example, if you think that this is a great song, which would be a kind of like a, for a hockey game, like music, like if you have something like this, can you basically then, as a one-off, approach some person from some publishing company, or do you need to have a kind of like this deal that you are like on some publishing company's roster as an artist?
It depends on how much of the contract work you want to do yourself, right? Like, let's say that you have a composition you feel would be perfect for like the Finnish hockey team, right? And they're going to basically be playing, like let's say that's a European championship. First off, there's one person inside of the hockey team who probably handles their marketing, right? Like who would be the deciding person of like, hey, do we like this song or not? That would be a good person to know, right? Like, but at the same time, maybe that person wants to go through a music publisher that, so they don't have to have direct contact with, with the person who is the composer, unless you already have a friendship with them. Sometimes that's the sweetest deal. If you can go directly to that, that's fine. You could do that. But normally, having a music publisher represent your composition gives you more opportunities, because they're probably going to look at other opportunities as opposed to just that one. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Because so let's say that you write a term with. Or you settle on a term, let's say, I'm going to give you this composition for 12 months, 18 months, and you can sync it as many times as you want, right? Like they could be like, I have people reaching out to me, or music publishers saying like, hey, we have this song that you did with, person X and so. There's a YouTuber that wants to use this for 10 of his episodes. It's like, okay, fine, that's fine. So all, from the streams, you're going to get part of that, and they might pay a small fee to use your composition for whatever they're doing. This application applies to anything that you do. But to answer your question, yes, it would be great if you knew the person who makes the decision, but they normally, what I would try to do is find out who they normally work with as a publisher and reach out to them, because then all you really have to do is basically say, hey, I have this library of these many songs. Let me know if any of these are interesting, and maybe we can come to terms on a deal, right? And then you give them an opportunity to place. This is called place. They place the song as many times as they can, or pitch it to the different channels that they have. And then at the end of the 18 months, you can decide to either renew it, or you basically say I have another publisher that I've actually gotten to know now because they've heard my music, and then you go to them and give them an opportunity. So it's an evolving thing, right? But it could be lucrative. It's just a lot. It's almost like a full-time job because sort of like being an influencer, you have to create content all the time, right? And that's a full-time job for most people who actually make a living doing it. So when you make sync music, you could either choose to have one niche, like I'm the greatest at making trailer music, then that's what you do. And then there's some people I want all opportunities. I want to do something for, nature shows, sports, boom, 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 boom. And then you kind of have to have a broader view, right? But there's a lot of competition like everything else. So I don't do this full time, and I kind of decreased it a little bit. But one of the guys that I work with from LA, we did a song together, Vo Williams. He's a rapper, but that guy, I think his goal was to have 1,000 songs. So he basically, and they're always constantly in rotation, right? So he's, the lyrics for some applications are very important because certain words will, will make a music supervisor oh, okay, perfect. This is going to be perfect for what I'm doing here, right? So, exactly. But some people just do instrumental stuff because there's a lot of that going on in the background of something, right? If it's it could be again, let's just stick to this one. Let's say it's the Ultimate Fighter or whatever. And it's like a reality show. And then when they're walking out to the cage, there's something playing in the background. Someone's getting paid for that, right? So anytime somebody uses your composition or your music, that person's going to get paid. But the music publisher will collect the money and then distribute it to you. So it can be fun, but it's a lot of work as well.
Is there some as you said, you've been doing some of those works, especially for UFC and stuff. Is there certain however you call those pieces of music, which you have liked most, or which has gotten some exposure, which people could be checking out?
Again, this type of music is not music that we wrote to. It's more. The only way. How should I describe this? It's more like hype music, right?
Yeah.
If you think about. Something that you would write for the UFC would have to have a building, it would basically be you building kind of an emotion. So it's it's either people who work out a lot or someone who's, I call it hyper music. But there's one guy we worked with, City Wolf, and he's a great singer. We did one called I Run This Jungle, and that one has gotten quite a few placements. The other one we did with Vo Williams was I Come Back, which that was the one we got a placement for. But anyway, it's all streamable. You could stream it on Spotify. But it's very people listen to this what is it? When you listen to that, people are associating me with a certain kind of music style. But I never really wanted to limit myself to just doing one music style. I did Soilwork as a band. But I was always interested in doing other stuff, with other musicians, just because I felt for me at least, I wanted to get better at having a broad palette of whatever I could do. Whether that's playing clean guitar with a Strat with somebody in town who's a female singer, or if it's someone who wants to do hip hop, or I've always wanted to do everything, right? So anyway. Yeah, I don't know if that really answered your question.
yeah, it did actually. Yeah, it did. I'm just curious because I have a couple of songs in my library which I haven't yet kind of produced to more of a demo thing, but they've been on my mind a lot, and I need to maybe figure out at some point maybe to put them out into and approach certain teams or something like this to maybe put it out and see how it's going to be. So that's why I'm interested to hear about that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's so much commercial in the United States. I mean, you have it in Europe too, but there's so many commercial breaks on American, cable TV, right? So there's always opportunities. But there are European artists that can pitch to American, music publishers. You can work across countries in order to do something like that.
What comes to you, in my books, you are probably one of the most influential modern metal music songwriters. And I think, for example, the album, The Natural Born Chaos, I think that one set a lot of bar for a lot of bands, and a lot of Finnish bands, for example, have been really influenced a lot of your work. It's interesting that I don't think a lot of people know your name yet, because I think you were more of then kind of behind the band as that guy, and then of course they know Soilwork. What do you think happened for the Natural Born Chaos album? Was there something different in the mix which kind of made that album so good? And have you been also listening it lately? And what do you think about that now after all these years, that album?
Well, first off, I want to say thank you, because that's, like I said, it's that's very flattering. And again, that album, it was a very special album. I think every album we did had a certain type of feeling to it. I don't know if maybe you could relate, you can remember specific times and specific moments with each album that you make, right? So looking through the progression of Soilwork, where we started up until we got to Natural Born Chaos, I think what we did is when we released A Predator's Portrait, that was kind of like an experiment, because we were we did a Shadow Child for Chain Art Machine as a bonus track, just to kind of see, because we're if people hate it, whatever. I mean, it wasn't really about what other people felt about the music. It was just us kind of experimenting, but it was such a new thing. So when we did that album, we were when we did that bonus track, we were oh, okay, cool. This might be something. We kind of wanted to branch out, I mean, we kept being compared to In Flames, and I understand, and At the Gates, because, as you know, Sweden was known for, the Gothenburg sound, and it was kind of hard, because as soon as you played melodic and you had screamy vocals, it always it was just easier just to put everything in one lump and be oh, you sound just like this. So I think there was a part of us that wanted to break out of that. It's how do we create more of a unique sound that kind of sounds like us, right? So when we did Predator's Portrait, that was a step in that direction. And I think honestly, just playing that live, we figured out okay, what works, what doesn't work. So when we went in and started writing for, Natural Born Chaos, it was just it was a little bit more of a mid-tempo based album compared to what we did before. We were faster as a band before that, right? But we said, sometimes in order to, we just wanted to make memorable songs that people might sing along with, because if you think about that, it's these days there's so much good music coming out, but it's hard to memorize it because it's just overwhelming. At that point, we weren't first with doing melodic vocals for extreme, music. I would say maybe Fear Factory was probably one of the first ones to do it, right? We just kind of added on the element of a lot of harmonized guitars. So we wrote Natural Born Chaos, and then being huge fans of, Devin Townsend, we were, me and Björn were, we were just huge into Strapping on Lad at the time, and we reached out to Devin and asked if he was interested in helping us produce the album. So, I think people always ask us, oh, so Devin is the reason that album sounds the way it does. I would say yes and no. I'm going to give Devin all the credit for, helping us become a better band. But when he came in and we were working on that album, he basically said, you have great ideas. I'm just going to try to help you guys make it better, right? And I think with his approach to how he was looking at music, we learned so much from him. Björn, I think Björn as a vocalist, that just took him to a new level. I mean, I think that was one of the things with that album that made Björn just really shine. not that it was bad before, but I'm saying like that was just like he really brought the best out of Björn. But we had everything written before we went into the studio, and it was just kind of a good. It was kind of a good blend of, you know, I guess sometimes you kind of get lucky, right? Like it wasn't intentional thinking like, oh, this is going to go this direction. That was just, we wrote what felt right to us at the time. And, you know, I resonated with people. So that one, I think it just somehow everything kind of just clicked with that album, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it did.
And it was well received, and the label was really backing us. You know, they were great, you know, promoting and putting us with, you know, big bands for touring and stuff like that. So it was, that's really when things started to kind of pick up and take off.
Yeah, exactly. Which studio was that recorded, Natural Born Chaos?
We did that in Studio Fredman. We did that, so the first 2 albums, we did all 4 of the first albums we did in Studio Fredman. But Studio Fredman was like a smaller studio in the other part of town for the first 2, and then he had a newer studio that we did A Predator's Portrait, and we did Natural Born Chaos in there. But A Predator's Portrait, we actually did drums at a different place, and then did the rest in Gothenburg. So yeah, that was kind of like our primary place to do, you know, I mean, everyone kind of defaulted to go into Studio Fredman at that point, you know, but...
Okay. And it was digital, for example, for the drums, not analog recording.
Yeah, at that point we did, it was interesting because, you know, younger musicians today are so, I mean, they don't even know what it's like to track on tape, you know.
Yeah.
And we started out, the first 3 records we did, all the drums were on tape. So you kind of had to like it's hard to punch on tape, you know, and so and I think, you know, once we did Natural Born Chaos, that was straight to Pro Tools, you know.
Okay. Yeah.
But so it's, you know, Pro Tools. I mean, obviously, you're way more effective. You know, you can be. I'm not saying that there is a mystique about playing or recording drums to, you know, 2-inch tape. It does sound good. It sounds really good. You can get like good saturation and good compression, you know, just from the tape, you know, by pushing it a little bit. But you can't really beat the flexibility you have with Pro Tools. Sometimes you have too many options though with Pro Tools. You feel like, I can do this a little bit, or I can do this, and then you end up just spending hours on something that, like, man, I had too many options, right? You get sometimes you have to commit.
Yeah, right. Was then the figure number 5? It has quite different drum sounds. Was that analog recording for the figure number 5 drums?
Figure number 5, we wanted to have a different drum sound for that one, so we actually used Daniel Bergstrand. It was kind of funny. It was kind of like either Daniel Bergstrand or Fredman were the 2 different producers in Sweden at the time, right? So if you wanted more, I mean, normally it would be more the technical, really technical bands like Meshuggah and Darkane, those guys would all go to Daniel to work with him. But we really liked Daniel's drum sound. So when we did figure number 5, we decided, like, well, you know what, we reached out to Daniel and said, hey, you know, would you be interested in, you know, tracking the drums for our next record? So that's why that one sounds different, because the drums were recorded with him. But that was I don't know what software he used. It wasn't Pro Tools. But he's really good with drums, as you know. I mean, he's a good producer for that. So
right. But yeah, quite different drum sound. I think the cymbals are somehow quite different, quite prominent. And it's a little bit like grittier, dirtier. And I guess the songs also are a little bit like, I guess there is more of that beer drinking metal kind of vibe there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that album that's primarily a mid-based, you know, mid-tempo type of album, right? But what I really liked about Daniel's productions is that he tend to use more of the room for the drum sound, as opposed to artificially adding a bunch of reverb and stuff like that. I mean, there's 2 different ways of doing it, right? Studio Fredman relied more on, he didn't really use the room as much. Maybe he does now. I don't know. I haven't kept track of it. But, Daniel was always all about like getting the room to blend with the drums, and it was a little bit more, that was his favorite thing to do, was drums and vocals, right? So for us, it was, you could tell that it's a little bit more of a tick kind of like drum sound on that album compared to listening to Natural Born Chaos, which is a little bit more rounder. A good drum sound too, but it's just a different, vibe on it, right? So you hit the nail on the head. It was a little bit more grittier sounding, but that's kind of what we wanted for that album.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and then like later after the Soilwork stuff, you also then produced at least, what was it already during the Soilwork second kind of term? You did the Nevermore's Obsidian Conspiracy.
I did, yeah.
Producing thing. What kind of session was that, and what was your role in that thing?
So Sneap mixed it, but I was, and a lot of times what I like to do, because I like to produce and I like to capture tones and all this other stuff, right? And then once you get to the end of it, I'd really kind of like to hand it off and have somebody else kind of like mix it. That's at least how I like to do it back then. I don't really do that many productions anymore. So what we did at that point is I flew out to Seattle and we recorded the drums there with Van. I'm trying to remember the name of the studio. It's a phenomenal studio. It's they've had a bunch of stuff in there. They recorded like, I think the first Foo Fighters record. It's a really, really cool studio. I'll have to give you the information later, but basically it's like it's on the ocean. Like you walk into the house and then the guy has literally dug out it's in a mountain. So underneath it, basically everything is like, it's like a round cylinder shaped room for the drums. Like it's really tall ceiling and it's got like brick all around it, and it's a really unique type of sound. But so we did the drums there, and then what we did is I used to, when I was doing productions back then, instead of actually owning a studio, what we would do is I have a mobile rig, right? So I have my mobile Pro Tools HD system, preamps, compressors, and all this other stuff, kind of like a traveling, rig, because I kind of knew that, I got so caught up in like, oh, you got to have this, you got to have that. And it's like, no, you really have to have these, right? If you don't have your ears, you can have the best equipment in the world, but it's not going to make a difference. So, I had good pre's and compressors, and that was about it, right? I only needed about four preamps back then to record vocals and guitars. Well, that was enough. But the drums we had to do someplace else. So we would do the session of the drums, drop it into Pro Tools, and then basically we came to the East Coast, and then we rented like a huge house. So basically the plan was to set up a mobile studio, like let's say in the basement, while the guys can still be upstairs and play video games or do whatever they want. We were on the lake, so they could do whatever they wanted to do. And that, financially it made more sense for the band because they were like, oh, cool. It ended up being a win-win thing for the bands because that way, they can just relax and do whatever they wanted to do in the house while I'm downstairs, recording, right? So that's kind of how we did it with the Nevermore album, and then so Jeff, Warrel, rest in peace, and then Jim, but they were all there in the studio. So we would just take turns, kind of like Jeff would be down. We spent, God, I don't know, 3.5 weeks on guitars. I mean, there's so many. We spent a lot of time on that, and then we had vocals and bass, and then Sneap mixed it after that. So.
Right. So there was a strong kind of like engineering role for you in that.
Yeah.
In shaping the sound, also the drum sound and all the sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I had the house engineer, in the studio in Seattle, kind of like we were, I tried to commit as much as possible for the drums going in. So that you can take advantage of, like, if you got a really nice board, you want to get some EQ out of that, and not, and then maybe just make small fine adjustments in Pro Tools for the mix, right? So I would track with compression, for the snare. You put compression on the kick. You just have to make sure I mean, nowadays you probably sound replace most of it and just blend a little bit of the natural stuff in there because, you know, stuff sounds different now than it did back then, you know, even if it's not that long ago. But yeah, it was an engineer / producer arrangement role, you know, like I always, because just engineering, I mean, I liked it, but for me, it was like, again, going back to that creative process, you know, like when you work with a band, if, you know, I would want to make sure that any musician that I worked with, I would try to capture the thing that they are the best at. You know what I'm saying? Like if it's something where I was like, okay, unless the band is just like, I want it to be like this, I don't want any feedback, but nobody ever said that, right? So, you know, if you're working with a drummer, you know, when you are the engineer producer, I think your role is to make sure that, I think the most important thing is to make sure that people feel comfortable, right? I mean, I've been in studios where the producers are just like, well, it's going to be my way. And then I don't think you get the best performance out of people if you can't really make them feel comfortable, you know, when you're working with them. And a lot of times, you know, when I work with guitarists, it's like, it's kind of rough the first two days when you get started, right? Because I will never take the guitar and play the part for them, but I would also demand that, like, if you're going to play your part, you have to be prepared, right? And if you can't play the part the way it's intended to be, then you're going to have to simplify it, because we're not going to just like piece every single section together. We're just not going to do that. I said, you know, you make it sound like a machine that way, right? And you know, if it's too complicated, then we're going to have to simplify it. Or, you know, we're just going to have to do it over and over and over again until we get the take that we need, right? So that's what I said. The first 2 days are normally a little rough, and then after that, they're like, okay, because you elevate your guitar playing, or you're singing, or you're drumming when you're pushed, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It, especially in the digital age as well, there is the kind of like a temptation to kind of not prepare yourself when you go to the studio. You're able to do them in parts, but and then especially for any instrument, but for the drums, like especially lately. Sure, I've been doing some drum covers myself, but now then the way that really kind of teaches you to play the songs is to like do these one take drum covers. Like when you film it and you do it with one take, and like if there is a certain part which kind of fucks it all up, you don't want to release it, so you need to go back to the table and do it so many times that it's so solid that you're able to do it with one take and then release it. Then you are kind of, I think in my books, ready to go live on stage or to the studio, unless you kind of go there half-assed, a little bit prepared.
I completely agree with you, and that kind of takes us into like today, right? Like, because now today I feel like with the expansion of YouTube, you know, I mean, when we grew up, there was no YouTube, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's like, you know, I look at my son and I'm like, he's trying to, you know, learn to play a little bit of drums, and I'm like, I said, dude, you have no idea, like, you can just go in and watch the drummer, like, play the part and slow it down and like figure out exactly what they're doing. Back, you know, I sound like a dinosaur when I say it, right? But when before YouTube, you kind of had to listen and kind of interpret the music in one way, right? And then it's like you sort of try to figure it out, or playing guitar, you know. But I agree with you that, you know, I'm not opposed to punching parts, but I think that you got to be careful, because there's a fine line when you're actually recording something. That I believe that if you play a longer, you don't have to play the whole song, but let's say you play a whole section. Let's say I'm going to do the verse by itself, right? Or I'll do the chorus. So you have a longer take, and you try to perfect that, because I think you get more of the natural nuances when you record a section that's a little bit longer. You know, I mean, in your case, it's drums, and if you're uploading something to YouTube, you're correct. You know, like you're going to do it a million times, but by the time you get to that millionth time, it's like, yes. And then there's this, it's just something that's almost like learning how to ride a bike, right? You get to the point, it's like, oh, okay, now I understand. You're kind of falling into the groove more when you've kind of like in the beginning had an idea of what you wanted it to sound like, and then you listen back to it and it's like, oh man, that sounds terrible. I want it to be like this. So you do over and over and over again. Same thing with guitar. I mean, trust me, you know.
Yes.
I think the problem sometimes though is it can be discouraging, I think, for someone who is a lesser player to watch it and all they see is the perfect end result, right? So I think this conversation that we're having that, hey, you know, you're going to be doing this a couple of times before you actually get there. Nobody ever talks about that, right? So I think it's for aspiring musicians, it's important to know that it's okay to suck. You know, like that's you know, that's just how it is. And you got to do it over and over again to just get better at it. You know, that's the only way to do it.
Yeah. The recordings, they don't lie. Then, like, if you have a lot of messy stuff, then it's ton of work and like slicing and like it's a really pain. And of course, in the end, you need to play them likely live as well. So why not? But of course, sometimes I guess the studio might come a little bit like in a quite rushed state. Then things have not been so locked in. Then of course, then it's a little bit more like a difficult situation. But it will likely take in the end less time and will be way more fun if you really prepare yourself before coming to the studio or then go to the live situation.
Yeah, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not opposed to punching stuff. I punch all the time. I mean, it's it's like you can't let your pride get in the way of trying to achieve your result, you know, in a reasonable time frame. Right? Like I think, you know, like nobody has the time or money unless you are getting paid tons of money to just like, I'm going to block out the studio for 6 months and I'm just going to wait for that. Everything's going to be a magical take. Sure, if you have the money to do that, you can do it. But, you know, I'm just saying that what I noticed back then, again, I'm not in the scene as much as I was back then, is that people come in and they expect the producer to fix them and to make them sound good, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, you know, your instrument is your craft. It's your responsibility to basically master that instrument, not my job to fix it, right? So I think that's an important lesson. But you're right. That's where I feel like live performance is good because you, at least me, you're probably the same, is I'm used to things sounding almost perfect on a record, and I want to achieve the same result live, but you have that element of stress when you're live because, you know, like, there's no stopping, like, oh, I got to adjust my hi-hat a little bit like this, you know what I'm saying? Or, you know, like the cymbal goes down like this, and you kind of have to be okay with the chaos of the moment, right? Like, it's like, oh, shit, my cable just stopped working. It's like, you just have to make the best out of it, right? So, but once you get more... I think once you get more experience, you know, playing live and recording, I mean, that's better than any practicing by yourself like will ever do, you know, like playing with other people. That's something that I feel like that's kind of going away a little bit, right? Sometimes I feel like you get 30-second clips of musicians posting stuff, but you never know how they lock in with a band. You never know what they sound like when they're getting together with another. But sometimes it's like, but I don't care. I'm just going to post a bunch of stuff because that's all I want to do, right? But being able to play with a band or a drummer as a guitar player or whatever, and like following, you know, learning like how someone locks in with somebody else, that's a magical thing. That's a really, really cool thing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And then you also did, related to a bit to the Nevermore, you also did the great Praises to the War Machine album with Warrel Dane. And was that so that you co-wrote the songs and also produced and even mixed it as well? Or what was the thing with that?
We did, it was a friend of mine, Matthias. We did the mix together. He did a lot of the engineering work with the mix as well. But that was interesting. That took a couple years to make that album, actually, because we started writing when I was still in Soilwork, and then when I left, I think there was about a year and a half before we even, you know, began doing it. But yeah, I think I'm not really sure. There might be 3 songs that were written by Matt Wicklund and Warrel, and then the rest of it was me and Warrel, you know. But we would basically be like, I've recorded using computers and drum machines since maybe second record with Soilwork. Like as soon as Cubase VST came out, which was an absolute nightmare when it came out, that's when I kind of got interested in being able to record by myself at home, you know? Like I remember, like I was a little kid and my uncle, who was in the band, obviously, he was playing more like, he had like a drum machine, a sequencer, Atari, and I was like, oh, this is crazy. You can actually like record by yourself, like all these other things, you know? But once I started doing that, and a whole new world opened up for me. And that kind of helped me be able to provide maybe like, at least like, instead of just playing a guitar riff and say like, hey, what do we do with this, right? Like I would be able to come with a sort of like a formulated, like a rough sketch of a song and say like, hey, what do you guys think about this? Oh, this is great. And then let's change this drum section here, or Henry would come in and do this, or, you know, and we put the vocals in a certain way. And it was a collaboration still, but it was just a tool to kind of create like a rough song. So I did the same thing with Warrel. I would send him, you know, like songs. He would come back and say, hey, can we change this? And we'll change that. And then we kind of adjusted everything. And then once we had the album written out, he flew to Nashville because that's where I lived at the time. And then we did the record together. I mean, it's interesting. I have gotten a lot of people reaching out to me about that album. More in Europe so than over here. But I think in Europe it really resonated. You know, like Warrel was, you know, I think Nevermore was probably bigger in Europe than they were in the States. But yeah, that was a fun experience.
Right, and you recorded that basically then the drums, for example, and the vocals in Nashville in some studios. What did you?
The drums. Well, I was all over the country, and actually we recorded the drums in Baltimore. So that's like a little north of where I'm at, and then we flew back to Nashville and we did everything else. You know, guitars, vocals, and everything in Nashville in a studio there.
All right, yeah. I think it's a 10 out of 10 album. Like really been digging that album. That's super.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
And okay, for me as well, Warrel Dane is in my all-time top 3 vocalists as well. So that's amazing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was very when he passed away, it was kind of unreal, you know, for me. I think for me it was. We hadn't really stayed in touch very much because he was doing a bunch of his other stuff, but at the same time, it was just kind of it's surreal, you know. Like you know, yeah, that one hurt. I felt bad when he passed away. It was right. He was a really, really talented guy.
What kind of person was Warrel Dane as a friend or as a musician to work with? He
was. Me and him were similar in one way because he was very driven, right? Like he always wanted to, you know, push himself and he wanted to move things along. He was very productive in that way, right? He was, you know, he was pretty firm on what he wanted things to be like when he was coming into the studio and doing stuff. But, you know, so we were kind of two alphas in a way, right? But at the same time, I think it all worked out because I'm like, hey, you know, I said, don't be married to an idea. Just like I'm not married to an idea when it comes to me playing a certain part a certain way. I said, you know, if there's something that can elevate something and make it better, in your opinion as well, not just mine, right? I said, you know, we kind of have to be open to that. So, you know, but he was a, you know, he obviously struggled with, you know, certain substances and stuff like that. And, you know, so it would be, you know, but I think that's just something that was part of his life, you know, and, you know, unfortunately that was what ultimately, you know, that's what we lost him to. But at the same time, I think he would have just moments of brilliance, you know, where you'd be like, oh man, this is just, you know, he's really just hitting that perfect note, or, you know, like the whole section right here, or, so yeah, he's missed for sure, you know, but it was a good experience to work with him.
Right. Yeah. Did it come after that Nevermore album, and it was kind of like a continuation kind of from there, or which one came first?
So, Praise to the War Machine came first.
All right.
Yeah, and he was
How
the one who
find you for that? Or what was the connection?
You mean Warrel? Well, we actually toured together. Our first big tour we ever did in '99 was with. It was Annihilator, Nevermore, and then Rawhead Rex. We were sharing a bus with Rawhead Rex, and Annihilator was with Nevermore, and we did like a 6-week tour in Europe, and that's where I really got to know those guys. And then we stayed in touch. I think that was the only tour we did together. But whenever we would come to the States or they were touring in Europe, we would always get together. We would always talk. I was very good friends with them.
Right. Yeah. And so these days, at least, I think you have a post as well in Instagram. You're doing more mixing these days, or at least I've done some mixing. I mainly do it here from home, but I like I said, I have a full-time job now, which is not. I mean, it is musically related, but that is me basically. I'm employed by Fender Guitars, so I work as a product development manager for Jackson and Charvel. And so that takes up most of my day, right? And then, I try to squeeze in, as much time as I can in between when I have breaks. And, so I would say like at nighttime or in the mornings, where I basically try to still, make music stay alive. So that's kind of how my days are. So you have a home studio. What kind of stuff do you have there? You are at the moment in the studio, right?
Well, I have, I've kind of like stripped things down a little bit because now it's not really, it's almost 100% in the box, like everything is kind of in the box at the moment, but I got some, basically, UAD stuff, I have, basically just run everything into Pro Tools, and then I use my Focals, for my monitor situation. Very, very bare bones, but like I said, I feel like these days the digital world has just made such rapid improvements that I don't think it's really necessary to have a ton of outboard gear anymore. It's nice to have, and it's it's a good investment because normally it doesn't really decrease in value, but I think primarily as long as you have good monitoring, a room that doesn't reflect too much, not too dead, but it doesn't reflect too much, and you have a good signal chain going into it, you can pretty much do whatever you want in today's DAWs, honestly.
Right. So what kind of acoustic treatment do you have? You have like certain kind of like what kind of stuff do you have done for the treatment? And are you also using then some calibration stuff to kind of like tune the room or stuff like this?
I am not. So I was in that realm for a while and thought everything needed to be perfectly calibrated. But I think I have a friend in England, Chris Clancy. He's a phenomenal mixing engineer and singer. So he's been mentoring under Colin Richardson, but we've had a lot of conversations about this, and you don't have to have a perfect room in order to get a good mix. I think the most important thing is that what your room sounds like, right? So, and how that translates to everybody else. Like when you're doing a mix, for example, these days, at least kids listen to music in earpods, right? So that's one thing you have to take into account. If everything just sounds great in your speakers, it's not always going to translate well. You get into the car and it's like, man, there's so much bass, or there's not enough bass, or like it's getting messy. So I think the most important thing is to be able to monitor on multiple different things and make sure that it sounds good in all of them, right? But at this point, I just have Auralix, that's pretty much that, and there's no affiliation with me and them at all. It's just I have a couple of bass traps, stuff like that, just to make sure that I don't have standing, make sure like at least the low end is not rumbling all over the place, right? Because that is kind of I think that's the kiss of death, sometimes when you have too much. I love low end. Sometimes I love it too much, but you still have to be careful so you don't, it can overpower an entire mix when you have too much low end, right? Especially if you have like detuned music with like, very subby kicks, or like, and then you want to blend the bass in there too. You really have to find that good cross section where they can both be heard, right? So yeah, I mean, I basically just, going back to what my friend Chris said, it's like play music in the room, put the speakers in there, and then move around in the room until you get to the point where you feel like, okay, this is where I feel like I'm getting the best directional pattern inside of my room. So that's kind of what it is. Kind of simple, honestly.
Right. Yeah. Is it also like, do you do still some other artist trackings as well in that room, like vocals or guitars?
Yeah. So I did. It's been a couple years, but. Yeah, I've done some stuff for the sync stuff here, where we just set up a mic in the room, I used to think that, you need to have a vocal booth and all this stuff. But if your room is kind of dead and, you don't have too many reflections, you can track vocals in there, no problem, You just want to be careful. I always test it with compression to make sure that everything, like when you compress, it doesn't have too much of a room sound in it, you know what I'm saying? Because then you have to deaden stuff. I mean, I have reflection screens and stuff like that too, which I use primarily. But yeah, I did vocals here, and then me and Howard Jones, he was here. We did a couple of songs together. Still kind of in process on that, but yeah, he was here. We tracked that as well. So yeah, some of the stuff we can do in the room. I think. In a perfect world, would I love to have like a dedicated studio? Yes, that would be fantastic, right? But again, I live in a house with my family, so it's kind of like, kind of have to figure out, well, this is my spot. I think it would be different if I'm doing production full time. That probably would be a different stuff for me. But I do it when I feel like it and whenever I have time. So that's kind of how things are these days.
Right. So you did, was that Light the Torch, the project, and some other project, I guess, as well with the Howard Jones?
Light the Torch I had nothing to do with. That was Howard's own project. Me and him, that's unreleased. We haven't done it. We haven't released anything to the world yet. So that's still sitting there in the riff library. Me and him doing stuff together. But yeah, it was basically me writing the music, Howard writing, the vocals. And then, I had Anup basically play drums on some of the stuff, and that guy is just, he's
Anup played that. All right, yeah, I just had a podcast with him previously.
Yeah, he's such a wonderful human being, and he's an incredible drummer. And he has a similar setup where I think he lives in his house, and then he has the studio in his house. Mm-hmm. And, like I said, I love working with him. He's got great groove. I think for me, it's like that's something that I really, really appreciate. With a drummer, is someone who's got like, and he understands the idea. Like I don't really have to. I send him an idea, and I said, hey, here's a kind of a basic thing of the drums. I said, do whatever you want. It's like, oh no, I like this. Let's just, I said, okay, we'll just, put a little bit of a groove element into it, and yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good things about that guy. He's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess like the projects you did with Howard Jones, was it like at least some was mentioned, some King Fighter, and that's then and at least something which was released was with the Tone Assassins, some kind of
so that's a sync song. Like that song is basically that's a song that we basically did for type of like sports elements, and that's sort of that vibe, right? But we have the stuff that me and him are working on for King Fighter is metal, like that's metal, full on metal. And he's a busy man, so am I. So we're just kind of trying to see when our, when everything will kind of align, and we'll, it's going to happen. I know people asking me about it, and I said it's been taking years, but we're still hopefully planning on moving forward with it. We'll see how much it's going to be. We haven't really decided. So.
Right. Does he live near there, or how did you basically end up working with Howard Jones that much?
So Howard reached out to me. This was a long time ago, but I think when he left Killswitch, he had plans to kind of do his solo album or something like that. And so he was looking around. Ironically, Warrel Dane was the same way. And then he reached out and asked if I was interested in co-writing some stuff. So I said, yeah, sure, let's do it, And so that's kind of how I knew Howard since before, because we've toured together, and I filled in for Adam when his back was blown out in the UK. So I did 3 weeks with Killswitch as their filling guitar player. So I got to know Howard really well at that point. I mean, he's an incredible singer. I mean, an amazing singer, and we have really good chemistry when we do music together. So we just have to find the time to finish that.
Yeah, cool. So it's been maybe in some years in pipeline coming something out of that project.
Let's do this. Like I'm hoping, like we'll see. I mean, like I said, we both are busy with stuff that's going on, but hopefully that's going to metastasize and actually it will happen.
I mentioned also that I'm building myself this live tracking drum studio in a garage.
Oh, nice.
in a detached thing. At the moment, it's kind of like it's a 40 square meter like a space. It's a tracking room for drums mostly, but also still for guitars and vocals and producing and stuff like this. But the drums is still the most focused aspect of it. Do you have some kind of experiences on how would you yourself approach some room like this, which is completely bare bones and it would become a tracking room for drums? What would be kind of like your approach, how to tackle the acoustics of it?
The one thing I would probably look for is to make sure that you don't have, obviously you have to go around and clap to make sure that you got to work on some of the spots in the room that would bounce this like nasty frequencies around like that. But the only advice I can give to you is to probably talk to an acoustic engineer. Like, I think there's so many of them out there where you can basically submit like your room and basically say, hey, here's what I have. Like, this is the height and my dimensions. And he's going to be like, okay, what kind of floor do you have? What kind of ceiling do you have? And you might not have to do that much, but you definitely need to have, I'm talking about drums primarily, right? You probably need to talk to them and see, like, you can almost submit like a drawing to them and they can calculate it for you depending on what your budget is. I mean, the sky's the limit, right? You can spend tons of money, soundproofing, but it all has to do like, what I think is like you have to see what kind of investment you need to make to fit the application, right? Like I mean, if you're doing, I think what's really cool these days, I'm assuming you're going to be doing some YouTube stuff in there, filming yourself and like record, kind of like what Anup does, right? Yeah. He would probably be a better person to talk to when it comes to how you should do the acoustic treatment for that room. Another guy you might want to talk to is Nolly. If you haven't talked to Nolly yet, that guy is incredible. Like he would be a guy who probably would be able to help you figure out some of those things in the room, But right. That guy I think it's one of the best mixers out there too. So. That would be a guy I would talk to. But I'm not trying to push it away from me. When it comes to guitars and vocals, it's pretty simple. I mean, you do need gobos, right? Like, you can be able to utilize... I built... we're going to have to convert into... So, yeah. Growing up metric, now it's inches and feet, right? So, but let's stick to metric. So let's say that they're like two... like they're 2+ meters tall, right? Like in boards like this. And, basically you would have like a thin plywood with holes in it on the back. I mean, it depends on how pretty you want this to be. I mean, you could paint them and make them look nice, right? And then you fill it with insulation on one side and fabric. And then on the other side, you basically have, the plywood with holes in it, pegboards, as we call them here. And then so air can kind of pass through it. And if you just want to make sure that the ceiling has enough treatment in it so that it's not, the sound doesn't go up and just directly down into the microphone again, but you don't want it to be dead, right? That's what I'm saying. Like you might have to talk to somebody about how much the treatment should be. But basically, those gobos, you could use those. Like if they're standing up, you could create a small vocal booth from it, right? Like right in front of it, right? And then if you wanted to use it for guitars, you can lay them down and then basically put the cabinet, like inside of this thing. You could even use it for drums. You know what I'm saying? Like it all depends. But that's really cheap to kind of like build a couple of those. There's so many drawings. I mean, you can go to Pinterest or anything like that. There's a lot of good stuff that's free out there that you can actually use as a tool for that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think there's also like as you kind of mentioned as well, there are certain like acoustic designers who might even do like a free kind of a first kind of like that if I send him the the drawings and things like that, they might even do it for free, some kind of like a suggestion how to proceed. So that might be one aspect I could still also a little bit consult instead of just kind of like going with my knowledge and understanding, which I've been, of course, not trying to suck as much as possible, from YouTube's and from the acoustic channels and things like this. So.
I checked out some of your stuff. It sounds really good. So you know what you're doing. But I see what you're saying. Like there is, Finland is renowned for having phenomenal, acoustic, engineers. I mean, you have some, and you have. Amazing hi-fi stuff come out of there too for pro audio. But you honestly, I would say look around, and I like I said, you can get a quote for something. It's probably not that expensive. And then I think what they do is they'll calculate something, and if let's say that I have a budget of X, this is how much I want to spend, then I'll be like, okay, well then you could do this, right? Or if I want to spend this much, and sometimes what they probably will do, which they're much better equipped to answer that question than I am, and say like, well, what is your application? What are you looking to do? I was like, well, I want to use it for drums, or I want to have it kind of like be a multitask type of recording element to it, right? Because I'm sure for you're going to want to fit like your cameras in there, the lights and all this other stuff, and then still be able to get a really nice sound. But yeah, that sounds awesome. That sounds really, really cool.
Yeah, it's an exciting and super exhausting project as well, because like at least half of the labor I'm doing myself, and a lot of like nitty-gritty things, and like do all the soundproofing, especially you need to kind of like do it right, because we also live in like a detached houses area, so neighbors are quite near, so I need to, and I've been basically now working 1 year on the soundproofing side, and now we are kind of like doing the electricity, and now next week there's possibility for me to start doing acoustic stuff. So
okay, cool.
So that's the situation. And earlier in this home studio, the kind of like more of like this home part of the studio, which might be more suitable for mixing, is I have been building these like acoustic panels of these like rock wool. It's some like 10 centimeter thick like panels also in the ceiling clouds and stuff like this. So, but now also for that, I think I need to go deeper for these gobo things, which I'm thinking about putting to the new studio. So, and as you also mentioned, it's good to have them movable. So for the purpose kind of thing.
That would be the only recommendation I would use, because you want to, let's say you want more of a room sound, you don't want the gobos in there at all. You just want to get them out of the room. And if they're kind of fixed, then, I'm sure you can do something where they kind of sit on the wall and they kind of come up and down. But, having them being mobile, that's a great thing, They're a little heavy, but...
And I guess also like, having, as you also mentioned, that like one other side of it can be like this, like a more of like a reflection thing. Then you are also able to turn them and like adjust. And like as we are now, I'm in the phase like it's now an open and empty canvas. So I need to kind of like try out and figure out and enables the building of it.
Yeah, the principle is kind of the same as, at least when I was growing up, like at schools, you would have like it kind of looks like a gobo, right? But it has like, they have wheels on the bottom, so you can kind of roll them around, like to isolate certain things. The principle is the same, having them on wheels would be ideal, like you can maybe lockable wheels, so you can kind of like lock them down when you get them in the point where you want them. Just make sure there's not too much underneath. You could always put a carpet down and put them on top of a carpet, at least for vocals. It's not, as long as you don't get too much of a reflection of the room into the microphone, that's my only pet peeve. I think sometimes when I have had singers send me stuff, it's once you start adding compression, you start to hear the room in it, and then it's like that's not good. I mean, it's like because then you're just fighting and you want it to add. First, you have to carve out the room in the EQ, right? Yeah, right. And then you're going to add effects to it, and it just never really seems to sit right in the studio, right? So it's better to have the sound being a little bit more dead at that point. But having a good sounding room is key for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I guess to me at least, also the ceiling is a mystery because like it's a floating ceiling. It has this resilient channel, so it's not like it's not attached. So I'm not able to put super heavy stuff there, but I've been figuring out how to do lightweight kind of like a framing for some rock wool cloud stuff, just like some kind of like a gardening kind of like this crisscross thing, and on top of that stacking them and just putting fabric over it and just kind of lightweight, but still having depth enough to do the cloud kind of thing.
And hopefully you're doing that with long sleeves and gloves, right? When you're working with the rock wool.
Well, yeah, but rock wool isn't that bad. I think the most bad is the glass wool.
Sorry, I meant fiberglass. Fiberglass. Yeah.
That's I don't have. I have like tons of now from certain like places where I've scavenged like ton of like rock wool in my like other like what is it called storage space.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of rock wool to work on. Yeah. But I heard that the fiberglass would be better for like bass traps to have more fluffy stuff. But I think rock wool should be also pretty okay.
I'm sure it's going to be fine. Yeah. For me back then, because I was on a budget, it was I used fiberglass for the gobos, and it was hot. It's a hot summer, and I was outside, and you think you don't get, even when when you hose it off, like afterwards, you go to bed and it's like, oh, your whole body just like itching like crazy. Yeah, it's not fun. But it's just temporary.
Was there a certain, when you were starting out, of course, interested to hear like what kind of got your initial spark to the music anyway, but also when you became a songwriter, was there a certain like a part of theory or something which kind of unlocked your potential the most?
I have to admit that I have a basic understanding of theory, but I was never really, I'm more of a hands-on type of person, like I basically learned everything by ear, that was a big part of me because I had a hard time with figuring out, reading charts and stuff like that. So I think for me, starting out, it was just trying to mimic what I liked, if that makes sense, right? And I mean, obviously, in my mind, it sounded great, but maybe to somebody else, it'd be like, that's not how you're supposed to play it. But I think that there's a beauty in being able to absorb music, trying to play what you hear yourself, and then kind of creating your own type of style. Exactly. I'm not saying that my style is unique by any means, but I think for me, it was more of a trying to mimic what I heard. But it's interesting. A lot of the people I played with, they played a lot of covers, so they learned a lot of the chord progressions. I never did that, So for me, it was like I think it was a little bit of a longer road for me in that aspect of it. But I think once I started playing with other people, like just playing in bands, that's what really helped me sort of get an education in what worked and what didn't work. So I started out when I was 12. My parents, I had expressed interest in playing guitar. They thought that meant classical guitar. No, I saw my guitar. No. I saw my uncle with like a neon, gem, like neon colors playing rock music. I was like, that's what I want to do, right? But they was like, oh, here's an acoustic guitar. So I used to go to what's called Kommunala Musikskolan, which is like the community, in town, and you play with your fingers. I like it now, but I'm saying back then that was not what I wanted to do. So I remember my parents kind of chasing me around town, every Thursday for, going to take guitar lessons, and it was just, I think I've stopped playing guitar for that very reason. And then I think when I was 15, they gave me like an electric guitar finally, and at that point, it was kind of like around that time. That was when Metallica came out with the Black Album. Guns N' Roses was really big. I I was gravitating more towards the metal aspect of it, and a lot of my other friends was grunge. Right, so either you were metal or you were grunge. Like there was like no way you could listen to both of those things. So, and that's kind of and you get the tablature book. And I was like, okay, this is more. I can kind of figure out how to play these things, and But as I would say, as I started consuming more music and playing with more people who were better and better, for me, that works better than going to school learning, the theoretical application. Of course, that came a little bit later, but there's no better teacher for getting good than surrounding yourself with musicians that are better at, than you at what to do. You know what I'm saying? Like that's been my only advice I've given anybody that has asked me anything. That's not to say I've played and I have produced people who are very, very technically proficient and that are very, they have a degree in music, but that doesn't make you a great player. It can be a tool to make you better. But a lot of times if you feel like you're just inside of a rule set of what you're allowed to do, then you can miss out on a certain element. I'll give you an example. Just because it's more efficient to play something in a certain area on a guitar doesn't mean that that's the way that that's going to sound better. So I would always let's say if you're playing, maybe we're getting too technical here, but let's say you're playing a riff and it's like an octave riff. Sometimes when you play that higher up on the neck, it's a different sound that sounds better than actually playing it in like the first 5 frets, which is more of that's maybe the more logical, economical way to do it. So for me, it was like, if it sounds good, it is good, right? But I would get into it with some other guitar players sometimes when we talk about that. I was like, I don't care. I said, you're going to play it like this because that's how I wrote it, Yeah, but it's, that's like a big stretch. I was like, yeah, but it's going to sound better that way. You can play it live however you want, but for recording, we're going to do it this way, right? So, that's just,
right.
I don't know. That was a long-winded thing of kind of like how my logic works for me,
Right. Yeah, I was just curious in that sense because you came still quite early in the 90s, like that much of a technical player. So I was just thinking, like, was there a certain kind of a method? But I guess that is what you are saying. It was maybe your method to kind of get to that certain level on quite early stage in the 90s and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with, like I said, my uncle was a big influence on me because he played guitar. But then it was basically, I don't know, it was, I was into, like when I was growing up, like I said, before metal was really prevalent, it was like Dio, like even Europe had, incredible. I mean, John Norum was incredible. You'd have Michael Schenker, Key Marcello. I was like, man, these guys are incredible. I mean, Yngwie too. Yngwie was, but he was just like, that was just on Mars. I'm just like, there's no way. I aspired at some point to be like, oh, I'm going to be a fast guitar player. Then realized like, that's never going to happen. So I was like, well, maybe it's better if I focus on writing good songs, good riffs, and if I am doing like a solo, at least I'm telling a story, right? Like I never basically said that I am a phenomenal lead player. I'm just trying to play something that I think people will recognize, right? Like I think some other guitar players, I'm very impressed by them being able to play fast, but if you're listening to it, I think you should, in my opinion, you need to blend, the speed with something that's memorable, right? Like, at least from my perspective, right? Because no one hums along with, like someone's like flying over the strings, like, and my biggest thing was basically, I need to have a good tone when I'm playing, right? Like, I need to be able to hold and bend a note and really like sustain it and hold it. Whereas a lot of guys basically would just focus on the speed and then they would use a whammy bar instead of like learning how to do a vibrato with your left hand. So that's probably because I grew up listening to blues and, like my dad used to take me to like the local jazz. He wasn't really a musician, but he loved music. So we would go and listen to, in a jazz club in Helsingborg, we would go and listen to blues or funk or something like that. And so I kind of got exposed to that, where I'm like, oh, okay, I got to watch them, see like, okay, what do I used to do on, that's what I said. It doesn't matter what music style it is, as long as it says it can evoke an emotion regardless,
Yeah, exactly. Is there certain bands now, like lately, at least for me, it's getting harder and harder for new bands to impress me, because I guess I've been so long listening to music, and of course I have my background and stuff like this, so very rarely these days comes really great metal music bands which gets me inspired. Has there been certain, what could be maybe your most recent band which has inspired you in metal or then in other music style?
I have to admit that I don't listen a ton to metal anymore, but I think one band that caught my attention not when they first came out, but Sleep Token was one of those bands where I have a friend who sent me, maybe it was probably 2 years ago or something like that. And at first it was interesting because he's like, I just want you to listen to this. He didn't tell me what it was. And I was like, okay. And he's got good music taste. So, like sometimes when people give you, it's like, oh, you have to listen to this. It's because you like it and you don't know if the other person kind of agree. But so you have certain friends that's like, oh, okay, he and I normally have the same kind of taste. So I listened to it from beginning till end, which, I normally never do. And then I called him back. I was like, dude, this is incredible. And he's like, yeah. And because I'd never really heard anything like it. It's like almost like emo mixed with metal mixed with, but they were very proficient, and the singer was incredible. And I really liked the electronic elements in it, where I was like, oh, cool. So they're like adding, synth keyboards on top of the bass. And it was just kind of it was hard for me to decipher really what was going on, but I really liked it. And the drummer is incredible. And then I went to go check out the band, and I realized they were all masked. And I was like, dude, no offense to that. I was like, that's cool. But had I seen that first before I heard the music, I probably would have interpreted that in a different way, right?
Okay.
So for me, that was probably a band that kind of captured my attention. I think those guys are, I think they do something that's really unique and pretty cool. I mainly listen to other stuff, like it's kind of like, for metal, that would probably be the band that I would say has kind of captured my attention lately,
Right.
It's interesting now though, because I have a 15-year-old son, and I, now, when I was growing up, I was more like in one genre. Like I was just listening to mainly to one genre, right? But now I think because people or kids have access to listening to music however they want, like they don't consume full albums like we did. Like we would listen to like, oh man, there's only 1 week song, but the whole album through, we would just listen to it, right? So I think, without me even telling my son what I like, he starts like showing me stuff. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So yeah, he's listening to like Rage Against the Machine, or he would be listening to Limp Bizkit or Metallica or Pantera. And I'm like, I said, I just want you to consume all the music you can, and I don't care what kind of music you like, but it's interesting. Like his favorite band is Pantera. I was like, oh, okay, right on. I never played it for him, but that was my favorite band, so it's just interesting. Some things are probably genetic, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. I think one thing which I was curious, which I wanted to maybe ask you already 20 years ago when we were talking last time. Björn Strid joined or kind of like as a project band, the Disarmonia Mundi back in the day. What were your thoughts on that band, and when he joined that or like participated in it, what do you think about their music?
I thought that was, I think it was primarily one guy, right? Like I think he who wrote most of the stuff.
He's the mastermind, Ettore Ricotti.
Yeah, he's incredible. I remember it's been a while now, but it was interesting. That guy was super talented, and like I said, I never really. If someone in the band wanted to do something outside, that's fine. I would never really tell anybody they couldn't do that. Whatever you feel like you need to get out of your musical endeavors, you should do it. I thought it was great. It was interesting because they came to a couple of shows. I think we were touring with In Flames, and I can't remember what album it was that they did, but they dropped off one album with us, or I think they gave one to Jesper, because Jesper was still in Flames at the time, and he didn't know who they were, like, at all. And then the front of house guy, basically, when we were doing sound check, he just put the CD in, and Jesper's like, whatever, it's just one of those demos that we're gonna get. And then they played it, and he's just like, I was like, yeah, dude, they're pretty good. And he's like, oh man, this is incredible. So it was, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time, but yeah, I remember that. That was. Is he still doing music?
I think they are now doing. They have their latest album, which was supposed to be coming for some years now, but I think it's now. At least they just recently released some snippet of it.
Okay, cool.
So it's with Björn Strid on vocals.
Oh, it is. Okay. I haven't heard it. Yeah. So. Very cool.
Yeah, I was really impressed by them back in the day, kind of like after you guys as well. A bit similar style, but really impressed by them. And my band got signed with them. Ettore signed us to the Corner Records, which is the label they are running. So that was our first albums. Got the master deal through Ettore, so it was pretty honor for me, because I was also like really inspired by his works. A really great songwriter. Yeah, they have had some long hiatuses as well between the albums, but at least now, I think the album is ready, but they've been postponing its release, but maybe it's coming out soon.
Cool.
It's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So what kind of like a typical day is it to yours these days? So you're working at the Fender as some kind of like in some kind of role for the guitars representative there, So basically it is kind of like a day job every day kind of there, and then in between doing projects and stuff like this. That's
normally how my day goes. There was a while where I didn't do any music because when I started working for Fender, we moved to they're based out of Arizona in Scottsdale, and I have a friend who actually was able to help me get an interview there, and I kind of worked my way up. I started in customer service, like answering phone calls and stuff like that. So it was very different from my life, on the road and stuff like that. But, I had I had a little kid at home, and, got to pay the bills. So, basically that kind of grew into, I started out in research and development, and then I started handling, some of the drawings and, like basically documentation for guitars. I mean, it was like going to school for guitars, because you came in there, I knew how to play guitar, but I didn't know, this is basically breaking down every single component of a guitar and knowing how much everything costs and, like all this other stuff, right? And then I think after 2 years, I got the job as a product development manager. So I basically handle, the entire development process for designing the guitars and working with manufacturing and the R&D department to develop stuff for Jackson and Charvel. So anything you see out there right now, it's just I have my fingerprints on all over that.
Yeah. You're getting to know your craft like really into the deep roots. How it's the instrument.
It's fun. I mean, it can be a very. Not everything is creative about it, but there's a high element of creativeness too, because you have to figure out what kind of works, right? Like, and it's interesting to see how primarily for Jackson it's metal, right? Like that's the primary target, and it's interesting to see as people are playing metal these days. It's become a lot more sophisticated with the instruments, So back in the day, we would just play a 6 strings with we would just tune it down to B standard, right, on a 6-string guitar with the 25.5-inch scale. Nowadays, people are playing, baritone scale guitars, with the, or they would have 7-string or 8-string guitars, and with multiple different types of scale lengths, So I think, in looking at how instruments today, guitars primarily, how much that has evolved from when we started out. I mean, the primary guitar is still the same, right? The 6-string guitar. But when it comes to nowadays, when you work with artists like I've worked with my first project when I was started working with Jackson was actually with Misha Mansour. So Misha Mansour's signature model was like that was my first project when I came in there, and I didn't know that Misha knew who I was, right? So whenever we kind of really hit it off, Misha's a great guy, and he says, "Oh man, yeah, let's," So we kind of it was a great thing in trying to figure out, what he wanted, what we were capable of doing in the factory, and kind of push the elements of like what can the perfect metal guitar be these days, which was something that he had a goal in mind, and I think we achieved it, and that's been hugely successful ever since. So
yeah.
I work with, so I basically I can be kind of the bad guy because the artist relations guys will bring the artists in. A lot of times we have a connection because of my previous life, and then we kind of work on developing, their dream guitar to becoming a model for production, basically. So
right.
I love what I do, and it does take up. It's a full-time job. So but in the meantime, and normally like mornings or nights or weekends and stuff like that, I still dabble with music and as much as I can.
At least on your Instagram, I've seen some mountain biking stuff, and like, is there some other stuff you consume on YouTube or podcasts, or what kind of like stuff you're interested outside of the music?
Yeah, I mean, I am. I think after touring is pretty hard on your body, and I think after touring for as many years as I actually did, my back was really not in good shape. So, and I'm a tall guy. I'm like 194, right? So
same height as me.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go, I guess. And so when I left Soilwork, this was the first time my back was just really messed up. So I think at that point I just made a conscious effort to at least stay in shape, right? Like I was like, I have to start lifting weights and maybe start eating a little bit better and all that stuff. So I consider myself a pretty healthy person. I don't pass judgment. Anybody can do whatever they want, but so hiking, mountain biking, lifting weights, and my son is really into fishing, so we do a lot of fishing. I try to, we're so much on a screen these days that it feels good to, at least connect with nature in some way. I think that really balances you. And sometimes I feel like, I don't know how it is for you, but at least for me, like sometimes when you sit and you try to push something out, you're trying to be creative, you realize that I just need to shut everything down and I just need to do something that's completely different, right, from what I normally do. And normally it is like either going fishing or going for a hike or a long walk or exercising, and then it just comes, right? Like at least that's how it is for me. I don't know how it is for you.
Yeah, and I think generally, like people, we need to be bored as well sometimes.
Yes,
it's difficult these times because there's so much of things we can consume and stuff like this. But like, it's one of those things. It's good to reserve yourself some like a time when you are not maybe like at least ideally not doing anything. So you kind of like get even bored. I don't know if it's possible these days, but like that would be really good for your like a creativity thing to your mind to start working on new things.
Yeah, and I think I think also just like basic things like we like to play cards every once in a while because it's not on the screen, right? So you're just kind of sitting there and I think I don't know, like those are the kind of things. I'm trying to think of what else we normally do to yeah, but mainly it's just trying to stay active, because I sit so much, and I think a lot of people sit so much. I think I did enough of that during the pandemic that you kind of wanted to get out, everything, most of the stuff now is remote, like we're talking, you're on, it's incredible really. Cause I mean, you're like 7,000 miles away from me and we're sitting here in real time, and talking to each other. It still doesn't give you the same social element as going out or meeting other people. So I think that is something that we still need to promote. I think, hanging out with other people, doing fun stuff, laughing, laughing is a big part. I think we can solve a lot of problems with humor, like just, as long as we can, we can make fun of each other in a way that's kind of playful. I think that's really what can take the temperature down of a lot of things in a way, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly. So which was the area which you actually live? So it was somewhere North Carolina. It's in the East Coast.
Yes, on the East Coast. Yeah, we're kind of like, we live, let's say, halfway into the state from the ocean, basically. So everyone asks us like, "Oh, you're getting hurricanes?" Yeah, we are getting hurricanes, but I'm not on the coast, So we get a lot of rain, a lot of rain.
Yeah.
Like it's, for someone growing up in Scandinavia, it's hard to imagine the kind of rain you can get here. I mean, it's not like Florida, but still, like sometimes it could be like there's so much rain you have to stop the car, like you have to drive over to the side because it's just like it's almost like the sky is just opening, right?
Yeah.
But no, we like it, and it's very, like I said, I lived all over the United States pretty much, but North Carolina is an interesting place because it's not like we don't live here because it's like a mecca, like we live here because it's kind of like you have a lot of forest, which I like, and we have the mountains here, we have the ocean here, which you have that in Finland already, but it's very similar. To
we don't have mountains. We have all other stuff, but no.
You
mountains.
do, yes, that's right. You don't have mountains, but you got lakes and forest and the water and
those we have.
And for me, I feel like and the seasons, right? So I think I have to live in a climate where there are seasons. It would be really hard for me because I have lived out west. And I love the winters are great, but then the summers are just brutal. I mean, I think it's maybe because I'm from Scandinavia. It's just, man, that's rough, man.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, we are getting also like a little bit like a strange, like also phenomenon, like heavy rains, heavy wind gusts these times. I think something is happening. I lost your think. Yeah, so something's happening with the climate, at least here as well. So it's getting a little bit more aggressive, but still pretty like, I guess, great conditions compared to some of the extremes you might be having in Florida and this.
Yeah, but for them it's like every day, like 2:00, rain, and then sun comes up. But then you have like 90% humidity and like maybe 35 degrees.
Yeah,
that's rough. That's like a steam sauna. Don't get me wrong, I love saunas, but I don't want to walk around with clothes in the sauna. Like that's.
Yeah. Have you, by the way, sauna in your home?
I would love one. I actually we got an ice bath recently, so I'm kind of we're trying to get into that. But it's funny because over here, the whole hype over here is like saunas and ice baths. I was like, well, they've been doing that in Scandinavia for 1,000 years, right? Like it's. But and it's interesting. That's another thing that I heard, that there was a Finnish study that was made at one of I think it was the University of Helsinki or something like that. I could be wrong. That if you do saunas 3 or 4 times a week, that reduces like your all-cause mortality by like 20 or 30%. That's insane. Yeah. So you guys. You have the right idea, for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm safe because we are doing these days like 3 to 4 times sauna.
Are you really?
Yeah, we are.
Nice. Yeah,
it's nice. But you said you are doing ice baths these days.
Yeah, we're trying to do it. It's the only problem is it's too hot and we have it outside, so we have to dump ice into it.
Okay.
So I'm kind of waiting for the temperature to go down outside, so I don't have to worry about buying a bunch of ice, dumping it into it. But so I've only done it twice already, but it's. Okay. It's a lot of the breathing, like I just kind of have to figure out like how to breathe when you get in there, but
should be pretty healthy. Yeah, I love also like going to the ice swimming stuff. Really good.
Yeah,
especially after sauna, it's such a great like a hot and cold in the mixture, and it's kind of like at its best it kind of be really like a better than any kind of like drug for your mind to like really have a like.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's really it's a fantastic way to shock your body. I mean, in a way, I heard that it's almost like your body thinks that it's dying. Like, when it does that, it creates new. I think it basically flushes your body of like dead cells, and then new cells come in, like the shock proteins. Again, I'm not an expert at this stuff, but all the data is suggesting that the way you guys have been doing it forever is really the way to do it.
I think it kind of teaches your body to handle the stress, these shocks, kind of. So when you're teaching them to hold it, it's kind of like has more like strength to be prepared for a smaller like flus or something like this. It should be helping for that for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's it's we totally. We'll see. I would love to build a sauna if I can, but we'll see.
You can build those. Do you have a yard? So if you have a yard, you are able to build these, barrel saunas.
Yeah, I would love to have one of those. Yeah. The only problem is my backyard is kind of like this. So I would have to kind of have to build something out and then have it sit on top of that. But yeah, it definitely has crossed my mind. My brother used to have a barrel, and he did it for a while, and then ended up just being a place where he hung his like wet clothes to dry. So I was like, okay, well, I would use the sauna all the time.
Exactly. But that's not the way to use sauna for drying clothes.
I know exactly. It's sacrilege if you're Finnish for sure. But yeah, exactly. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. All right, I think we should be wrapping it up. But hey, thanks a lot, man, for taking the time.
Absolutely.
Really
Thank
great
you.
Catching you after 20 years, and we are both alive. It's a good thing.
That is a good thing, and hopefully we'll be here for much longer. And reach out anytime, man. Like if there's anything I can help you with, or that's you just good luck with your studio project, and send me some links on that. I would love to see how everything kind of progresses.
Sure thing. Let's see how it's going. And alrighty, thanks, man.
Cool.